Hey, grade 12s, time to talk about periods again. Woo! All right, let's do the biochemical pathways. Well, not really the pathways, just like what hormones affect which ones in which way, causing you to either menstruate or create a lining, or allow for ovulation to occur, or the development of a brand new follicle and how that is pushed around the body. All right. So, hormonal control in the menstrual cycle. Pituitary gland releases two gonadotrophic hormones and two ovarian hormones as well. Okay, so we've got the follicle stimulating hormones, which are producing follicles. We have luteinizing hormone, which is causing ovulation. We have estrogen, which is helping produce the lining, and progesterone, which is help maintaining the lining. So here's a complex negative feedback system for you. This is a more simplistic one. The slightly more complex one is coming next, but I'm going to point out a couple of things over here. So the green lines show stimulation, and the red lines show inhibition. So we've got the pituitary gland. First, always we start on the left hand side. Okay, so we've got the follicle stimulating hormone that is produced by the pituitary gland. The follicle stimulating hormone stimulates the germinal epithelium inside of the ovary to start producing a follicle. That follicle then starts producing estrogen, and that is found inside of the ovaries. Once that estrogen increases, it then causes a negative feedback system on the follicle stimulating hormone. And this is because you don't want to produce more follicles when one is already developing. You only want to allow one follicle to develop in a 28-day cycle, and that takes 14 days. Okay, so in 14 days, it's going to increase in amount of estrogen. Once it reaches that peak, it's then going to hit a threshold, which is going to inhibit the pituitary gland from producing luteinizing hormone. From producing follicle stimulating hormone. When this happens, estrogen actually causes or stimulates the pituitary gland to start releasing luteinizing hormone, or LH. Once LH peaks, it is then going to cause the mature Graafian follicle to go through the process of ovulation. We're going to pop out the ovum from the ovary itself into the fallopian tubes, and then that leftover cell where the ovum was produced inside of is now going to be named a corpus luteum, and I'll show you pictures of that later. That corpus luteum is going to produce progesterone. That progesterone causes a negative feedback system on the follicle stimulating hormone as well as the luteinizing hormone. So let's say, for instance, your body didn't, or the estrogen did not do its job, and you started producing another follicle. The progesterone would actually stop the body from the pituitary gland from producing follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone. So not stopping any follicles from developing, and or follicles that started developing from going through ovulation as well. Now, obviously, in the case of like twins and all those other wonderful bits and pieces and those complex stories, this doesn't work perfectly, but you just need to know that the pituitary gland releases FSH. That causes a follicle. The follicle produces estrogen. Estrogen stimulates the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone, which causes ovulation. The leftover follicle now becomes a corpus luteum that produces progesterone, and that progesterone causes a negative feedback system on FSH and LH, as well as estrogen causing a negative feedback system on the FSH as well. So now, this is a slightly more complex one, but please, will you draw this? This is super important. It's a scheme summarizing the interaction of hormones controlling the female sexual cycle, specifically humans. Okay. Then we have the pituitary gland at the top corner over there, and on the top right we also have stimulation, inhibition, and secretion. So what secretes what inhibits what, and what stimulates what. So let's start on the left hand side again, because obviously we can't have ovulation without a follicle. So follicle stimulating hormone is secreted by the pituitary gland. Those are going to produce the growth of a Graafian follicle, which is, the mature version of these follicles. And we have this ovarian tissue, and both of those, the follicle and the ovarian tissue, are going to produce estrogen. What does estrogen do? It repairs the uterine wall. And by uterine wall, I'm talking about the endometrium. Okay. While the estrogen is going to cause the myometrium to start producing the endometrium, it is also going to start the stimulation of the pituitary gland to start producing luteinizing hormone. Luteinizing hormone causes the process of ovulation at day 14. Once that ovulation has occurred, the leftover follicle is now called a corpus luteum. This is inside of the ovary. That corpus luteum secretes progesterone, and that progesterone causes the proliferation of the uterine wall in preparation for implantation. Okay, so it's going to allow for the fertilized egg, if fertilization does occur, to actually implant into the wall of the endometrium, and that is then going to allow for implantation to occur where the baby can grow. Now, please also note that progesterone is also used is also used for the maintenance of the uterine wall as well. Okay, so proliferation, allowing it to enter the preparation for implantation and the maintenance of the endometrium itself. Now let's go back and note that the estrogen as well in the bottom left hand corner causes the inhibition of follicle stimulating hormone, as well as progesterone causes the inhibition of FSH and luteinizing hormone. So now, let's go over what happens over the 28-day cycle. We're first going to start with the gonadotrophic hormones, and then we'll move on to all the different other hormones and what happens to each structure, and then we're going to overlay all of them. That overlaying of all of these structures is in your notes. I'm not really sure what page it is, but I recommend you guys go have a look at it. And there's also a step-by-step, I think it's like 14 steps of what should happen, and all of that is on the slides over here, so maybe you can point it out for yourself. So let's start with FSH, because we need to start somewhere, and we need to start producing the follicle as well. So it's secreted by the pituitary gland, and it stimulates follicle development. You can see that the FSH is in quite high amounts right in the beginning because nothing is inhibiting it, and over time around day 4 it actually starts to decrease. As it starts to decrease, we can see that we have an increase in estrogen production stimulated by the luteinizing hormone production. Okay, so as estrogen increases, that follicle stimulating hormone is going to decrease, very similar to or very close to day 14. In many diagrams, you will also see that on day 14 there is a small spike in FSH. Okay, but we're not going to be too worried about that. I went and researched about it, and they were just saying it's because of the increased estrogen that causes that spike, but we're not too worried. So FSH in high amounts, and it slowly starts to decrease until day 14. Then progesterone plays a negative feedback system, so you can see that after day 14 the amount of FSH is still very low, and eventually as that corpus luteum starts to die out because of no fertilization taking place, there's no more progesterone, and no more progesterone means that I can now start increasing my FSH as well as LH. So that purple block over there says progesterone plays a part in the negative feedback, prevents the pituitary from producing luteinizing hormone and follicle stimulating hormone. This prevents the development of another ovum. Alright, so now that's FSH. Let's go look at luteinizing hormone. It increases increase in estrogen production stimulates luteinizing hormone production. Okay, so increased estrogen causes increased luteinizing hormone. We spoke about that earlier, how that increase in estrogen causes a stimulation in the pituitary gland to actually increase the amount of luteinizing hormone because the follicle has completely developed. As the level of luteinizing hormone peaks at just before day 14, the Graafian follicle bursts open, the ovum is released, and ovulation occurs. This means that the ovum itself has now been released into the fallopian tubes. Once that spike in luteinizing hormone occurs, there's no more need for luteinizing hormone, and then that actually decreases very rapidly all the way to day 28 again. Alright, so let's have a look at the reproductive hormones, estrogen and progesterone. Progesterone promotes the repair and growth of the endometrium, and also please include there, stimulates the pituitary to start producing luteinizing hormone. Then we have progesterone, or progesterone, I don't know, it depends how southern you feel like sounding, maintains the thickened endometrium in preparation for implantation of the fertilized ovum. So let's have a look at what these bad boys do. So the blue line is estrogen and the red line is progesterone. In the beginning, day 0, you can see that there is very little of both of those hormones, and then the blue starts to increase as a lot. So as the follicle grows and matures, more estrogen is produced, because remember, the mature Graafian follicle actually secretes the estrogen. Inside the Graafian follicle is an ovum. In the blue block, estrogen stimulates thickening of the uterus. The endometrium becomes glandular and vascular. So glandular as in it starts producing, well, like glands, and those glands are secreting certain substances, and vascular meaning that there's lots of blood vessels that are ready and waiting so that we can start increasing the endometrium. Then we have prep for possible fertilization and implantation. Okay, so we're starting to grow our endometrium. Then it increases and increases sort of towards just before ovulation at day 14. So you can notice that this is just before the luteinizing hormone peaks as well. So with increased estrogen, we're going to have an increased production of luteinizing hormone, and this is from the pituitary gland. When that increase in estrogen occurs, that peak hits, and then all of a sudden it completely plummets. Remember, this is because luteinizing hormone is causing a negative feedback system with the amount of FSH and LH that is being produced. Okay, with that LH, the progesterone actually causing a decrease in FSH and LH. That means that if there's no FSH, we're not producing follicles, and without follicles, we are not going to be producing estrogen. So our estrogen is going to drop like you have no idea. Okay, it's like going to drop it like it's hot, and then ovulation is going to occur. As ovulation has occurred, now estrogen has done its job. It has done the idea of growing the entire endometrium. Now it's the job of progesterone to actually kick in. And you can see that progesterone is starting to increase. As after ovulation occurs, the corpus luteum is now going to start producing that progesterone. So the top right hand corner, the left ovarian Graafian follicle, or the corpus luteum, produces progesterone, and this takes over the estrogen's function, and it maintains the endometrium as a whole. You will also notice that there is a second little spike of estrogen right at the bottom over there. Now there's a whole bunch of people who have got a whole bunch of theories around this. Some people say that it is to ensure that, what do you call that stuff? Oh, it's gone now. It's to ensure that menstruation starts occurring. And then also, like, people put that peak in many different places, but no one truly knows what that peak is for. Alrighty. Let's continue with progesterone itself. As the corpus luteum becomes smaller, secretion of the progesterone decreases. So if fertilization does not occur, then the corpus luteum itself just starts to disintegrate because it gets old, and that means that the amount of progesterone actually starts to decrease. Less progesterone means the endometrium is not maintained. The endometrium starts to break away and menstruation begins. Please note that menstruation is also called menses. And then also because of that blue block over there, if you are decreasing your amount of progesterone, that ultimately means that follicle stimulating hormone can be produced again, so that more follicles can be produced. More follicles ultimately means more estrogen. More estrogen means luteinizing, and the whole thing is just going to go around. And this is why we call it a cycle. Woo! Alright, so let's have a look at the ovarian cycle. This is what is happening inside of the ovary while development is taking place. Okay, so on the top left-hand corner, it stimulates follicle development. What stimulates follicle development? FSH. Then eventually the black one, just before day 14, follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone peak. The Graafian follicle bursts open, the ovum is released, and now we have ovulation. You are at risk of getting pregnant. The bottom green one, left ovarian Graafian follicle, corpus luteum, produces progesterone, takes over the estrogen function, and maintains an endometrium in case fertilization does take place. And finally the purple one, if the ovum is not fertilized within a few days, the corpus luteum begins to decrease in size, and you can see over there, and eventually it will become almost nothing as 28 days has happened, because there's going to be a new follicle that's being produced. All right. This is what your endometrium looks like. The less progesterone means the endometrium is not maintained. That is right in the beginning over there. Remember that the progesterone has decreased because the corpus luteum has broken away. The endometrium starts to break away and menstruation begins or starts to begin. Over time, you can see that it really starts to drop quite a bit, and that is in the menstrual phase. Then we have the proliferative phase, where things are going to start to grow again. So then we have estrogen, which is stimulated by the production of follicles, stimulates a thickening of the uterus. The endometrium becomes glandular and vascular. We spoke about that, and prep for possible fertilization and implantation. Finally, we have the secretory phase, and this is the leftover Graafian follicle or the corpus luteum, which produces progesterone, and this takes over estrogen's function and maintains the endometrium until the corpus luteum drops again, and then there's no more progesterone to maintain the endometrium, and it starts to break away, and the whole thing just goes around and around and around and around and around and around and around. All right. The last three sides are the same thing, just put in different versions. So there is the one that I want you to learn in your notes, but have a look at these. So this is the most important one, and this is one that you will see the most often. So we're going to start with that, and then I'm going to show you how it kind of changes over time as well. So let's start at the gonadotrophic hormones. We have follicle stimulating hormone, which is quite increased over there. Remember, that's produced by the pituitary gland. That is, as it's going to increase in amount, we have the production of the ovarian cycle, and production of the follicles inside of the ovary. We can see that our estrogen is going to start increasing as the follicles start developing in the second band over there. Finally, right at the bottom, we have menses, which is occurring while the new follicle is being developed. So while you are menstruating, you're already getting ready to produce a new ovum. Eventually, around let's say around day 9 or 10, you're going to have a very well developed Graafian follicle, and the follicle stimulating hormone starts to decrease ever so slightly, because remember that estrogen, or remember they spell either estrogen with an OE or just E, as that increases, it causes a negative feedback system on the follicle stimulating hormone, for the simple fact that you don't want to produce another follicle at the same time. As that estrogen starts to rapidly increase, you can see that the luteinizing hormone right at the top there peaks. As it peaks, follicle stimulating hormone also peaks, and this causes ovulation. Okay, all while this is happening right at the bottom in the uterine cycle, we can see that estrogen has also been involved in creating or causing a thicker layer of the endometrium, and this is going to allow for just thickening as well as implantation, which is going to occur soon. As that luteinizing hormone peaks, ovulation occurs, estrogen starts to decrease, because remember, luteinizing hormone sends a negative feedback system to the pituitary gland, which stops the production of follicle stimulation. Oh, geez, luteinizing hormone is going to cause ovulation, and then that particular ovarian cycle over there is this whole slide is a bugger up. Sorry, ladies. Let me fix it quickly. So once the luteinizing hormone has peaked, the follicle is going to produce the egg or release the egg. What is left over, or the follicle, is then going to create a corpus luteum. That corpus luteum is going to produce progesterone. That progesterone is going to cause a negative feedback system to both follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone, and that is going to cause the amount of estrogen to rapidly decrease. You'll notice there is a peak again of estrogen, that second peak I told you about over there, but while that progesterone is reaching its peak, it is maintaining the entire endometrium. But if that endometrium, or if implantation doesn't occur in the endometrium, eventually the corpus luteum is going to disappear and disintegrate, causing less and less progesterone to occur, and eventually we're going to start back at day 0, where menses has started again. Now, but sir, how is the endometrium maintained, because every single corpus luteum has a lifespan. So even after implantation has occurred, the baby itself should either start producing the progesterone, or your body needs to start producing progesterone separately. Okay, I'm not going to teach you that in large amounts. That is more high grade stuff, but just note that the body starts to take over the amount of progesterone, so the endometrium is maintained, because eventually your endometrium is where your placenta is going to form. All right, let's try this again. So they've just shuffled everything around, and what they've included is your body temperature as well. So your body temperature generally is between 36 to 36.5. Yes, women are slightly colder than men, and then it reaches to about 37. We then have the endometrium sheds at the top left hand corner, and we have the endometrium which thickens. That is from day 5 to about day 28. All right, so right at the top band, we have the thickness of the endometrium or the uterine layer. You can see that 0 to 5, it decreases rapidly. This is called menstruation or menses. Then from there, your estrogen is going to increase. And as it increases, we're going to thicken the endometrium. As the estrogen increases because of follicle stimulating hormone that's been producing the follicles, it's going to cause a spike, and luteinizing hormone is going to peak, causing ovulation. That ovulation is caused by the luteinizing hormone, and the egg is then released into the fallopian tube. Once the Graafian follicle has released its ovum, it's then going to become a corpus luteum, which is going to produce estrogen, as we can see the peak in the purple over there. This is going to maintain the endometrium layer until the corpus luteum starts to break away, and when it breaks away, we release less and less progesterone, which means that the thickness in the endometrium starts to decrease, and as that decreases, eventually we're going to start menstruation again at day 28. Right, for the third time, and if you're getting sick and tired of this, I completely agree with you. All right, so right at the top of there, we have the ovarian cycle. We have the follicle being produced by the follicle stimulating hormone. It's going to start producing, becoming a Graafian follicle or mature Graafian follicle. Once that happens, your estrogen levels are going to increase as the follicle is developing. When the estrogen peaks, we're going to stimulate the pituitary gland to produce luteinizing hormone. That luteinizing hormone is going to cause ovulation. Once ovulation has occurred, the egg is going to go into the fallopian tubes, and at the same time, the estrogen has caused the endometrium layer to thicken. Once that has thickened enough and ovulation has occurred and luteinizing hormone has peaked, your amount of progesterone is going to increase because the leftover Graafian follicle is now starting to produce progesterone, which is causing a negative feedback system with follicle stimulating hormone as well as luteinizing hormone, and that is going to maintain the endometrium until the corpus luteum starts to disintegrate or die or become smaller, and the progesterone decreases, causing the endometrium to start disintegrating. And when progesterone starts to decrease, the amount of follicle stimulating hormone can increase again, creating a new follicle, which is then going to increase the amount of estrogen again, and the whole cycle is just going to go around and around and around and around. All right, I hope you can watch this multiple times and go through the one in your notes. It's actually in stages, so you can actually follow the numbers. And yeah, so I hope that was quite interesting, learning about your hormones and how they affect your body, and how they actually cause you to become happier or sadder and or crave certain foods and or like environments and carbohydrates and all those wonderful bits and pieces. All right, ladies, look after yourself. Cheers.